The metal corridors of Station Omega-7 gleamed under bright white lights as Sergeant Daeho Kim walked down the hallway. His black combat boots made soft clicking sounds on the polished floor. The station was huge and filled with creatures from different planets across the galaxy. Some aliens were tall like trees, while others were short and round. Their skin colors ranged from blue to green to silver. All of them wore different types of armor and carried strange weapons that glowed with energy. Daeho held his plasma rifle close to his chest. The weapon was standard issue for human Marines in the year 2387. It could fire bolts of pure energy that could melt through most armor. But compared to the weapons the aliens carried, his rifle looked simple and old. The aliens had guns that could bend space and time. They had swords made of pure light. They had shields that could stop entire armies. Captain Sujin Park stood near a large window looking out at the stars. She was the highest-ranking human female officer on the station. Her uniform was clean and pressed with all her medals in perfect order. She watched alien ships come and go from the docking bays below. Each ship was different and beautiful in its own way. Some looked like giant insects with wings that sparkled. Others were shaped like crystals that rotated slowly as they moved. The Galactic Defense Coalition had invited humanity to join them 5 years ago. Before that, humans had been alone in space-fighting wars on distant planets. They had won every battle, but at great cost. Many good soldiers had died to protect human colonies from raiders and pirates. When the aliens finally came to Earth, they expected to find a weak species ready to surrender. Instead, they found warriors who refused to quit fighting. Commander Jae-Sung Lee walked into the observation deck where Captain Park was standing. He was a tall man with gray hair and many scars on his face. Each scar told the story of a different battle he had survived. The aliens respected him because he had personally killed over 300 enemy soldiers in ground combat. But even with that record, many aliens still thought humans were weak and slow. The briefing room was located in the center of the station. It was a massive space with holographic displays showing maps of different star systems. Alien officers from 12 different species sat around a circular table. Their translators hummed and buzzed as they converted alien languages into sounds humans could understand. The air smelled like metal and ozone from all the electronic equipment. Captain Park activated the main display screen. A three-dimensional image of Zerion 4 appeared floating above the table. The moon was gray and rocky with deep canyons and tall mountains. Red dots marked the locations where rebel forces had built their strongholds. Intelligence reports showed that the rebels had stolen advanced mining equipment and were using it to build weapons of mass destruction. The mission was simple in theory but dangerous in practice. A joint strike team would travel to Zerion 4 and infiltrate the main rebel base. They would capture or kill the rebel leadership and secure the mining facility before the rebels could complete their weapon. The timeline was tight because satellite surveillance showed the weapon would be ready in less than 72 hours. Corporal Min-Ho Choi studied the holographic display with intense focus. He was young, but had already served in 4 different combat zones. His specialty was explosives and demolition. He could make bombs from almost anything and had a talent for finding weak points in enemy fortifications. The alien officers ignored him completely as if he was not even in the room. 3 Zephyrian warriors stood near the back wall. They were 8 feet tall with blue skin and 4 arms. Their home planet had gravity 3 times stronger than Earth, so they were incredibly strong and fast. They wore armor made from the shells of giant space creatures. Their weapons were energy spears that could cut through spaceship hulls. They looked at the human soldiers with expressions that clearly showed disgust. The Valdorian tacticians sat together in a group. They had gray skin and large black eyes that could see in multiple spectrums of light. Their brains were twice the size of human brains, and they could process information at incredible speeds. They had developed battle strategies that had won wars across the galaxy, but they thought human tactics were primitive and brutal. Private So Young Han was the youngest human on the team. She had joined the Marines right out of high school and had never seen combat before this mission. Her job was communications and technical support. She carried a backpack full of electronic equipment that could hack into alien computer systems. The alien soldiers paid no attention to her at all, which was exactly what she wanted. Commander Lee stood up to address the mixed unit. His voice was calm and steady as he explained the importance of the mission. If the rebels completed their weapon, they could destroy entire planets. Millions of innocent people would die unless the strike team succeeded. Every species in the coalition had volunteered soldiers for this mission, because failure was not an option. The alien officers nodded their heads in agreement, but their body language showed they had serious doubts about working with humans. They had read reports about human combat effectiveness, but numbers on paper were different from seeing humans in action. Most aliens fought wars using advanced technology and careful planning. They avoided close combat whenever possible and preferred to win battles from a safe distance. Humans fought differently than any other species in the galaxy. They were willing to get close to their enemies and fight hand-to-hand if necessary. They could survive in harsh conditions that would kill most aliens. They could keep fighting even when badly wounded. But most importantly, they never gave up, no matter how hopeless the situation became. The briefing continued for 2 more hours as the officers discussed logistics and contingency plans. Supply ships would provide ammunition and medical support. Evacuation routes were planned in case the mission failed. Backup teams were positioned at strategic locations throughout the star system. Every detail was carefully considered and planned. As the meeting ended, the alien officers filed out of the briefing room talking among themselves. Their conversations were full of doubt and concern about the human members of the strike team. They had fought alongside other species before and knew what to expect from different types of warriors, but humans were still unknown factors in their calculations. Sergeant Deho remained in his seat after everyone else had left. He studied the mission parameters one more time, committing every detail to memory. He had survived dozens of similar missions by being prepared for anything. Tomorrow they would board the transport ship that would take them to Zerion 4. In 3 days, they would either be heroes or dead. There was no middle ground in missions like this one. The transport ship Stellar Horizon moved through space like a giant metal whale swimming through an ocean of stars. Inside the cramped passenger bay, 47 soldiers from 6 different species prepared for the mission ahead. The air recycling systems worked constantly to provide breathable atmosphere for everyone. Different species needed different gas mixtures, so the ship had to work extra hard to keep everyone alive. Sergeant Daeho Kim sat on a metal bench checking his equipment for the 3rd time. His rifle was clean and loaded with fresh energy cells. His armor was properly sealed and all the electronic systems were working correctly. His medical kit contained everything he might need to treat wounds in the field, but most importantly, his combat knife was sharp and ready for close quarters fighting. The weapon storage lockers lined one wall of the transport bay. Each locker contained enough firepower to level a small city. Plasma rifles hung next to sonic disruptors. Gravity hammers sat beside molecular blade swords. Energy shields were stacked like dinner plates, but the humans carried simpler weapons that looked almost primitive compared to the alien technology. 3 Corellian shock troopers approached the human section of the bay. They were massive creatures standing over 8 feet tall with crystalline exoskeletons that looked like living armor. Their skin was translucent so you could see their internal organs glowing with bioluminescent light. Their hands ended in razor-sharp claws that could cut through metal like paper. They moved with the confident swagger of apex predators. The leader of the Corellians stopped directly in front of Sergeant Deho. His 4 compound eyes focused on the human soldier, like a hunter studying its prey. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together in an avalanche. The universal translator converted his words into something humans could understand, but the contempt in his tone needed no translation. The Corellian asked how such a small, soft creature expected to survive real combat. He pointed at Deho with one massive claw and made clicking sounds that indicated amusement among his species. His 2 companions joined in making similar sounds. They compared human physiology to that of prey animals on their homeworld. They talked about how easy it would be to break human bones. Other alien soldiers began gathering around to watch the confrontation. A group of Nexari engineers floated over using their anti-gravity belts. They were small gray creatures with oversized heads that contained brains 3 times larger than human brains. They considered themselves the most intelligent species in the galaxy, and looked down on humans as barely evolved apes. The Nexari leader tapped his elongated skull with one thin finger. He suggested that human brains were too primitive for advanced warfare. He said humans relied on luck and violence instead of strategy and technology. His companions agreed, making high-pitched sounds that passed for laughter among their kind. They pulled up holographic displays showing human battle tactics compared to their own sophisticated algorithms. Private So Young Han watched the scene unfold from her position near the communication equipment. She could see more aliens joining the crowd around the humans. Zephyrian warriors flexed their forearms, showing off muscles that could crush steel. Valdorian tacticians stood in perfect formation, demonstrating their superior discipline and coordination. The mockery spread through the transport bay like wildfire. Alien soldiers who had been minding their own business suddenly found reasons to walk past the human section. They made comments in their native languages that the translators converted into insults and put-downs. Some aliens laughed at human weapons, calling them toys. Others questioned why humans were even included in the mission. Corporal Minho Choi tried to ignore the harassment and focus on his demolition equipment, but the aliens made it impossible to concentrate. They crowded, closer and closer, making it clear that humans were not welcome among real warriors. One Zephyrian actually reached out and touched Minho's helmet as if he was petting a small animal at a zoo. Captain Soo-Jin Park stood up from her seat, but Commander Lee grabbed her arm before she could intervene. He shook his head slightly, indicating that the humans needed to handle this situation without help from their officers. Military protocol required that enlisted soldiers resolve their own conflicts unless lives were actually in danger. The Corellian leader extended his claws to their full length. Each claw was over 6 inches long and sharp enough to cut through spaceship armor. He bragged about his kill count from previous campaigns. He had personally eliminated over 500 enemy combatants using nothing but his natural weapons. His exoskeleton showed battle scars from dozens of different conflicts. The alien crowd grew larger as word spread throughout the ship. Even crew members left their posts to witness the spectacle. The captain of the transport ship watched through security monitors but did not interfere. Interspecies conflicts were common during joint operations and usually resolved themselves without serious violence. More stories began circulating among the aliens about human weakness and cowardice. Some claimed that humans only won battles because they used overwhelming numbers. Others suggested that human victories were due to luck rather than skill. A few aliens even questioned whether humans had actually won any real battles at all. The psychological warfare was deliberate and calculated. Alien military doctrine emphasized breaking enemy morale before actual combat began. If they could convince the humans that they were outclassed and outmatched, the mission would be easier for everyone involved. Demoralized troops made mistakes and got themselves killed quickly. But what the aliens did not understand was that they were dealing with United States Marines. These were not ordinary human soldiers who could be intimidated by size and strength. Marines were trained from day one to fight against impossible odds. They were taught that retreat was not an option, and surrender was worse than death. Sergeant Daeho finally looked up at the Corellian towering over him. His expression was calm and relaxed, as if nothing unusual was happening. He had faced much worse situations than being mocked by alien soldiers. He had fought hand-to-hand combat against robots on Luna Base. He had survived 3 months behind enemy lines on Proxima Centauri. He had led rescue missions into active war zones where other soldiers feared to go. The alien harassment continued for another hour as the ship moved closer to its destination. But something was changing in the atmosphere of the transport bay. The human soldiers were not breaking down or showing signs of fear. Instead, they seemed to be getting more focused and determined. Their eyes held a cold light that made some of the smarter aliens feel uncomfortable. Private Han finished checking her communication gear and looked directly at the nearest Nexari engineer. Her smile was friendly, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. She had grown up in the slums of New Detroit, where survival required fighting every single day. These pampered alien soldiers had no idea what real hardship looked like. The transport ship began its final approach to Zarian 4, and the aliens started returning to their own sections to prepare for deployment. But the damage had been done. Battle lines had been drawn not just between the strike team and the rebels, but between humans and their supposed allies. The mission was about to become much more complicated than anyone had planned. The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Zerion 4. Through the small windows, soldiers could see the rocky surface of the moon growing larger below them. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with deep craters and jagged mountain ranges. This was the kind of terrain where battles were won or lost based on individual skill rather than advanced technology. The alien harassment reached its peak as the ship approached the drop zone. The Corellian leader stood in the center of the transport bay, surrounded by his allies from different species. His crystalline exoskeleton reflected the overhead lights, creating rainbow patterns on the metal walls. He had worked himself into a state of aggressive excitement that was common among his kind before combat operations. The massive alien pointed one clawed finger at Sergeant Deho and issued what amounted to a formal challenge in galactic military tradition. He suggested that the humans should remain on the ship while the real warriors handled the dangerous mission ahead. His voice grew louder as he spoke, drawing more attention from other soldiers in the bay. The Corellian proposed a demonstration of combat prowess right there in the transport bay. He wanted to prove once and for all that humans were too weak and slow to fight alongside galactic forces. His two companions moved to flank him, showing that they were ready to back up their leader if necessary. The challenge was clear and could not be ignored without losing all respect. Other aliens began forming a circle around the humans, clearly expecting some kind of entertainment. Zephyrian warriors pushed forward to get better viewing positions. Nexari engineers floated overhead, using their anti-gravity belts to hover above the crowd. Even some of the ship crew members gathered at the edges of the bay to watch the confrontation. Betting pools started forming immediately among the alien ranks. Credits changed hands as soldiers wagered on the outcome of any potential fight. The odds were heavily against the humans, with most aliens betting that any combat demonstration would be over in seconds. Some aliens bet on whether the human would even accept the challenge or try to back down. Captain Sujin Park tensed in her seat, ready to intervene if the situation got out of hand. But Commander Lee placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. Military protocol was clear about these types of challenges. Enlisted soldiers had to handle their own conflicts without officer interference unless actual lives were in immediate danger. Corporal Minho Choi and Private So Young Han moved closer to Sergeant Deho, showing their support for their squad leader. They were outnumbered 40-4, but Marines never abandoned their brothers in arms. If this turned into a real fight, they would stand together no matter what the odds were against them. The transport bay fell silent except for the hum of the ship engines and the recycling systems. Every creature in the bay focused their attention on the human sergeant who had been singled out for humiliation. Some aliens expected him to refuse the challenge and prove that humans were cowards. Others thought he might accept, but would be crushed quickly by superior alien strength. Sergeant Deho slowly stood up from his bench and faced the towering Corellian. He was exactly half the height of his challenger and probably weighed less than one of the alien forearms. But there was something in his posture and bearing that made some of the smarter aliens feel uneasy. He moved with the controlled grace of a professional killer. The human removed his combat helmet and set it carefully on the bench behind him. His scarred face told the story of countless battles on worlds these aliens had never seen. A plasma burn on his left cheek came from the siege of Kepler Station. The long cut across his forehead was from hand-to-hand combat in the tunnels of Asteroid Base 7. His missing left ear had been lost in a knife fight with space pirates. When Deho spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried clearly throughout the transport bay. He accepted the challenge but proposed modified terms that would make the contest more fair. Hand-to-hand combat only, with no weapons allowed from either side. The winner would take all respect, and the loser would shut up for the rest of the mission. The Corellian laughed at the suggested modifications. He was 3 times larger than the human, with natural weapons that could cut through armor plating. His exoskeleton provided protection equivalent to military-grade body armor. He had been born on a high-gravity world where everything was stronger and faster. This would be like an adult fighting a small child. But some of the more experienced alien soldiers noticed details that others missed. The human moved with perfect economy of motion, wasting no energy on unnecessary gestures. His breathing was deep and controlled, like someone who had learned to manage stress under extreme pressure. His eyes never left his opponent even when other aliens tried to distract him. The Nexari engineers began running probability calculations in their enlarged brains. Most scenarios showed the human being defeated within seconds of any physical confrontation, but a few variables in their calculations did not make sense. Human combat records showed victories against opponents that should have been impossible to defeat. Private Han activated her recording equipment to document whatever was about to happen. She had a feeling that this moment would be important for human relations with alien species. Either they would prove themselves worthy of respect or they would be forever branded as weaklings who could not back up their tough reputation. The circle of spectators grew tighter as more aliens pushed forward to get better views. Some creatures had to use translation devices to understand what was happening, but the basic situation was clear to everyone. One species was about to demonstrate its superiority over another species in the most direct way possible. Commander. Lee checked his weapon to make sure it was ready for action. If this demonstration turned into a riot, he would need to protect his people at all costs. But he also knew that sometimes respect could only be earned through violence. The aliens needed to see what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their limits. The Corellian cracked his knuckles, producing sounds like breaking stone. Each joint in his massive hands made loud popping noises that echoed through the transport bay. His claws extended to their full length and gleamed under the overhead lights. He had killed enemies with these natural weapons on 17 different worlds. Sergeant Daeho began removing pieces of his combat armor, starting with his shoulder guards and chest plate. He wanted maximum mobility for what was coming next. The aliens interpreted this as either extreme confidence or complete stupidity. Most thought it was stupidity since removing protection before a fight made no tactical sense. But what they did not understand was that Daeho had been studying their species since the alliance began. He knew their strengths and weaknesses better than they knew themselves. He had watched combat recordings of Corellian warriors in action. He had analyzed their fighting techniques and identified flaws in their combat doctrine. The transport bay became completely quiet as the two fighters prepared for combat. Even the ship engines seemed to fade into the background as tension filled the air. This was no longer just about one human and one alien. This was about the future relationship between humanity and the galactic community. Captain Park held her breath as she watched her sergeant prepare for what looked like certain defeat. But she had served with Daeho for 3 years and had seen him do impossible things before. If anyone could pull off a miracle against overwhelming odds, it would be him. The next few minutes would determine whether humans earned respect or ridicule from their alien allies. The makeshift arena in the transport bay was perfectly silent as the two fighters faced each other. Sergeant Daeho stood relaxed and ready, while the massive Corellian towered over him like a living mountain of crystal and muscle. The size difference was so extreme that some aliens wondered if this was really going to be a fair fight at all. Captain Sujin Park looked at the chronometer on her wrist and raised her hand to signal the start of combat. The alien spectators pressed closer to the circle, eager to see their champion demonstrate the superiority of galactic warrior species. Betting pools had closed with overwhelming odds favoring the Corellian. Most aliens expected the fight to be over before they could blink. The Corellian entered the fighting space with the confident swagger of an apex predator. His 4 compound eyes tracked every movement the human made while his claws flexed in anticipation. He had fought dozens of different species across the galaxy, and none had ever lasted more than a few seconds against his natural weapons. On his homeworld, Corellians hunted creatures that made Earth dinosaurs look like house pets. Their crystalline exoskeletons had evolved to withstand attacks from monsters with teeth like sword blades. Their claws could punch through spaceship armor, and their strength could crush bones to powder. No soft-skinned mammal should be able to pose any threat to such a perfect killing machine. The alien crowd began making excited noises as Captain Park started the final countdown. Zephyrian warriors clicked their multiple arms together in anticipation. Nexari engineers hummed with electronic harmonies. Even the normally silent Valdorian tacticians allowed themselves small expressions of interest in the upcoming spectacle. At the signal to begin, The Corellian charged forward with surprising speed for his massive size. His claws extended to their full length as he closed the distance to his opponent. His attack strategy was simple and direct. He would grab the human with his powerful hands and end the fight with one crushing blow to the neck. But Sergeant Day-Ho did not retreat or attempt to dodge as everyone expected. Instead, he stepped forward, moving inside the alien reach where those deadly claws could not be used effectively. His movement was precise and calculated like a surgeon making an incision. Every step was exactly where it needed to be. The first second of combat saw the human slip past the Corellian primary attack and position himself at the perfect angle. His years of training had taught him that every species had weak points no matter how strong or well-armored they appeared. The key was knowing exactly where to strike and having the speed to hit those targets. In the second, Day-Ho struck the nerve cluster located just behind the Corellian left shoulder joint. His knuckles hit the exact spot where the crystalline exoskeleton was thinnest. The blow sent shockwaves through the alien nervous system, causing temporary paralysis in his upper left arm. The massive creature stumbled slightly as his balance shifted unexpectedly. The second brought a devastating elbow strike to the base of the Corellian skull where his brainstem connected to his spinal column. The impact was precisely calculated to disrupt neural function without causing permanent damage. The alien warrior felt his vision blur as his coordination began to fail. During the second, the human grabbed the Corellian right wrist and twisted it in a direction that the joint was never designed to bend. The sound of cracking cartilage echoed through the transport bay as the alien dropped to one knee. His natural weapons were useless if he could not control his own limbs properly. The second saw Day-Ho drive his knee into the alien's solar plexus with enough force to crack the crystalline armor plating. The Corellian doubled over, gasping for air as his respiratory system struggled to function normally. His four eyes began to lose focus as shock set in from multiple traumatic injuries. By the second, the fight was effectively over, but the human was not finished demonstrating human combat doctrine. He grabbed the back of the Corellian neck and drove his head downward while bringing his own knee upward. The collision between alien skull and human knee produced a sound like breaking glass. The second brought a perfectly executed leg sweep that sent the massive Corellian crashing to the deck plating. The impact shook the entire transport bay, and several smaller aliens were knocked off their feet by the vibration. The champion of the Crystal Warriors lay motionless on the cold metal floor. During the second, Sergeant Day-Ho stepped back and assumed a defensive position in case the fallen alien tried to continue fighting. But it was clear that the Corellian was unconscious and would not be getting up anytime soon. His crystalline exoskeleton was cracked in 3 different places where precise strikes had found the weak points. The second passed in absolute silence as every alien in the transport bay tried to process what their eyes had just witnessed. The unthinkable had happened. The impossible had become reality. A small, soft-skinned human had defeated one of the galaxy's most feared warrior species in single combat. The second ended with Sergeant Day-Ho standing calmly over his defeated opponent. He was not even breathing heavily despite having just fought for his life against a creature 3 times his size. His expression remained unchanged from the beginning of the encounter, as if beating alien champions was just another day at the office. The silence that followed lasted for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few heartbeats. Alien minds struggled to reconcile what they had observed with everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. The betting pools that had seemed so certain suddenly became very quiet as credits rapidly changed hands. Some aliens began backing away from the human soldiers with expressions that looked suspiciously like fear. They had come aboard this transport ship expecting to babysit weak creatures who needed protection. Instead, they had discovered that they were traveling with apex predators who had been hiding their true nature behind a facade of primitive technology. Theo. Nexari engineers frantically began recalculating their probability matrices, trying to understand how their predictions had been so completely wrong. Their enlarged brains processed thousands of variables, but kept reaching the same impossible conclusion. According to all known data, the human should have been dead within seconds. 2 more Corellians stepped forward from the crowd surrounding the makeshift arena. Their species honor code demanded satisfaction for their fallen champion. But they approached much more cautiously than their predecessor had done. They had learned a healthy respect for human combat capability in the span of exactly 10 seconds. The alien spectators began murmuring among themselves in dozens of different languages. Universal translators worked overtime to convert the flood of comments into something resembling coherent communication. But the basic message was the same regardless of which species was speaking. Nobody had expected this outcome. Private So Young. Han smiled as she watched alien soldiers who had been mocking humans just minutes earlier suddenly find reasons to be somewhere else. The psychological dynamic of the transport bay had shifted completely. Humans were no longer seen as weak creatures in need of protection. Corporal Min-Ho Choi noticed that several alien warriors were now studying the human soldiers with what looked like professional interest rather than contempt. Word was already spreading throughout the ship about what had just happened. By the time they reached Zarian 4, every creature on board would know that humans were not to be underestimated. Captain Park allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction as she watched respect replace mockery in alien eyes. This was exactly what humanity needed to establish their place among the galactic military forces, not treaties or negotiations, but a clear demonstration of why they had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. Commander Lee nodded his approval at Sergeant Daeho, who was already checking on his unconscious opponent, to make sure no permanent damage had been done. That was another thing that separated humans from most alien species. They could be incredibly violent when necessary, but they were not needlessly cruel to defeated enemies. The transport bay remained eerily quiet as alien soldiers stared at the unconscious Corellian lying on the deck plating. His massive form looked smaller somehow now that he had been defeated by a creature half his size. The crystalline exoskeleton, that had seemed so invincible just moments before now, showed 3 distinct crack lines where human fists had found their targets with surgical precision. Sergeant Daeho stood over his fallen opponent with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire encounter. There was no boasting or celebration in his demeanor. He had simply done what needed to be done to earn respect for his species. His breathing was steady and controlled, showing that the 10-second fight had barely taxed his physical capabilities. The 2 remaining Corellians who had stepped forward to avenge their champion now found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Their species honor code demanded that they continue the challenge, but the reality of what they had just witnessed made them reconsider their options. The human had not just won through luck or accident. He had systematically dismantled their best warrior with clinical efficiency. The larger of the 2 Corellians gestured for his companion to join him in a coordinated attack. If one of them could not defeat this strange human creature, then perhaps 2 of them working together might have better success. Their species had evolved as pack hunters on their homeworld, and they were trained to fight as teams when facing difficult prey. But Sergeant Daeho simply nodded and gestured for both aliens to come forward together. This action sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd of spectators. The human was actually inviting a 2-on-1 fight against opponents, who each outweighed him by several hundred pounds. Either he was completely insane, or he possessed combat abilities that defied all logic. The betting pools that had already taken massive losses from the first fight now faced complete chaos. Alien soldiers who had lost credits on the previous encounter were reluctant to make new bets. But others saw this as an opportunity to recover their losses by betting against impossible odds once again. The mathematics seemed clear that no single humanoid could defeat 2 Corellians simultaneously. Captain Soo-Jin Park considered intervening to prevent what looked like a suicide mission for her sergeant. But Commander Lee caught her eye and shook his head slightly. They both understood that this moment was about more than just one soldier proving his individual worth. This was about humanity establishing its place in the galactic military hierarchy once and for all. The 2 Corellians began circling the human-like predators, stalking wounded prey. Their strategy was simple and effective. They would attack from opposite directions, forcing their opponent to divide his attention between multiple threats. Even if the human was faster than they expected, he could not be in 2 places at the same time. Private So Young Han activated her recording equipment again to document this second phase of the confrontation. Something told her that what was about to happen would be studied by military strategists across the galaxy for years to come. Human combat doctrine was about to be revealed in all its brutal efficiency to an audience that had never seen anything like it. The Nexari engineers floating overhead began running new calculations based on the data from the previous fight. Their enlarged brains processed thousands of variables trying to predict the outcome of a 2-versus-1 engagement. But their mathematical models kept producing results that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics and biology. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable for the alien spectators. Some creatures began making nervous sounds in their native languages, while others remained frozen in place, afraid to miss what might happen next. The tension in the transport bay was so thick it could almost be cut with a knife. Without any signal or countdown, the two Corellians launched their coordinated attack. They moved with the synchronized precision that came from years of training together as a combat team. Their claws extended simultaneously as they closed in on their human target from opposite sides of the improvised fighting circle. What happened next took slightly longer than the first engagement, but the result was even more decisive than before. Sergeant Deho did not try to fight both aliens at the same time as they had expected. Instead, he used their own momentum against them in a display of tactical brilliance that left the alien audience stunned. As the first Corellian reached him, the human dropped low and swept the alien legs out from under him. The massive creature crashed into his partner, who was attacking from the opposite direction. Both aliens became tangled together in a heap of crystalline armor and flailing limbs. Their coordinated attack had become a liability rather than an advantage. Before either alien could recover their footing, Deho was on them like a force of nature. His fists found nerve clusters and joint connections with mechanical precision. Every strike was calculated to cause maximum disruption to alien nervous systems while minimizing the energy required from his own body. This was not brawling or random violence, but pure combat science in action. The sound of cracking exoskeletons echoed through the transport bay as the human systematically dismantled both opponents. His movements were so fast and fluid that many aliens could not follow what was happening. One moment the Corellians were attacking, and the next moment they were both lying unconscious on the deck, plating beside their fallen champion. The entire second engagement lasted less than 15 seconds, but it completely redefined alien understanding of human combat potential. The impossible had happened not once but twice in the span of a single afternoon. 3 of the galaxy's most feared warriors had been defeated by one human soldier who looked like he could continue fighting for hours, if necessary. The alien spectators began backing away from the human soldiers with expressions that ranged from shock to outright fear. Creatures who had been mocking humanity just minutes before now found themselves wondering what other surprises these strange bipedal mammals might be hiding. If this was what one human could do, what would an entire army of them be capable of accomplishing? Corporal Minho Choyan. The atmosphere in the transport bay had changed completely as the ship made its final approach to Zerion 4. Where once there had been mockery and contempt, now there was cautious respect, mixed with genuine fear. The alien soldiers who remained gave the human section a wide berth, as if approaching too closely might trigger another demonstration of human combat capability. The 7 aliens who had not participated directly in either fight but had joined in the original harassment now found themselves in an awkward position. They exchanged uncertain glances with each other, wondering if they too might be challenged for their earlier behavior. The humans had shown remarkable restraint so far, but there was no guarantee that patience would continue indefinitely. A Nexari, engineer who had mocked human intelligence earlier, now floated nervously near the ceiling using his anti-gravity belt to stay as far away from the deck as possible. His enlarged skull pulsed with neural activity as he frantically recalculated probability matrices, trying to understand how his species' assessment of human capability could have been so completely wrong. The mathematical models that Nexari civilization had used for thousands of years to predict combat outcomes had failed catastrophically when applied to human behavior. Every equation suggested that the fights should have ended with human defeat within seconds. Yet the reality was exactly the opposite of what their most advanced algorithms had predicted. Word continued to spread throughout the transport ship, reaching every deck and compartment. Alien crew members who had been focused on their duties suddenly found reasons to walk past the passenger bay. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the human soldiers who had redefined galactic understanding of combat effectiveness in the span of less than 30 minutes. The ship communication officer received dozens of requests for copies of the security recordings from the passenger bay. Military commanders from 6 different species wanted to study human fighting techniques for future reference. The tactical implications of what had occurred were staggering for alien military doctrine across the galaxy. In the medical bay, the 3 defeated Corellians slowly came to terms with their humiliating defeat. Their species had dominated every world they had ever visited through sheer physical superiority. The concept of being outfought by smaller, weaker opponents was almost impossible for their minds to accept. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The largest Corellian who had issued the original challenge found himself unable to look directly at Sergeant Deho when the human came to check on his condition. The crystalline warrior had spent his entire adult life believing that size and strength were the only factors that mattered in combat. Now he understood that skill and technique could overcome any physical advantage. Captain Sujin Park noticed that alien squad leaders were beginning to approach her with questions about human military training methods. They wanted to know how ordinary soldiers could be taught to fight with such devastating efficiency. The requests came with a level of deference that had been completely absent just hours before. The Zephyrian warriors who had been so proud of their 4-armed combat advantages now watched human soldiers with something approaching awe. Their blue skin showed patterns of nervous energy as they realized that having more limbs meant nothing if you did not know how to use them effectively against a properly trained opponent. Commander Jae-Sung Lee received a priority message from the ship captain requesting a meeting before the drop operation began. The alien commander wanted to discuss revised tactical plans that would take human combat capabilities into proper account. The mission parameters needed to be adjusted based on this new understanding of what humans could accomplish. Corporal Min-Ho Choi found himself the center of attention from alien demolition specialists who suddenly wanted to learn about human explosive techniques. They had dismissed human methods as primitive, but now they wondered if there might be advantages to simpler approaches that they had overlooked in their pursuit of advanced technology. Private So Young-han discovered that alien communication officers were eager to trade technical knowledge about encryption and signal processing. The same creatures who had ignored her completely before the fights now treated her as a valuable colleague, worthy of professional respect. The change in attitude was remarkable and immediate. The ship armory officer approached the human section to discuss weapon modifications for the upcoming mission. He had initially planned to offer the humans upgraded alien weapons to replace their primitive human equipment. Now he was asking if human weapons might actually be superior for certain types of combat situations. Sergeant Dae-ho spent the final hour before deployment conducting equipment checks and mental preparation for the mission ahead. He was aware of the attention he was receiving from alien soldiers, but he did not let it distract him from his primary responsibility. The fights in the transport bay had been necessary to establish respect, but the real test would come on the battlefield. The alien soldiers began forming up in their designated landing groups as the ship entered the final approach phase. But now, instead of trying to exclude the humans from important positions, they were actively seeking to have human soldiers attached to their units. Everyone wanted the protection that came from having apex predators on their side. The Valdorian tactical officers who had questioned human strategic thinking now presented their battle plans to Captain Park for review and approval. They had reorganized their entire approach to take advantage of human combat capabilities. The humans were no longer seen as weak links but as force multipliers who could turn the tide of any engagement. Landing bay doors began opening as the ship achieved orbital insertion around Zerion 4. The rocky surface of the moon grew larger. In the viewports as automated systems prepared drop pods and landing craft for the assault phase of the mission. In just minutes, they would all be on the ground facing real enemies instead of each other. The alien soldiers who had learned to fear human combat ability now found that fear transforming into confidence about the mission's success. Having such dangerous allies greatly improved their chances of surviving the battles ahead. The rebels on Zarion 4 had no idea that they were about to face the most lethal combination of alien technology and human warfare doctrine ever assembled. As the final, preparations continued, alien commanders made last-minute changes to their assault plans. Units that had been designated for high-risk operations now included human soldiers who could be counted on to accomplish impossible missions. The entire tactical structure of the operation had been reorganized around human capabilities. The transport, bay that had been filled with mockery and contempt just hours before now, buzzed with professional cooperation and mutual respect. Alien soldiers who had dismissed humans as primitive creatures now sought their advice on combat techniques and battlefield strategies. The transformation was complete and total. Commander Lee addressed the assembled strike force one final time before deployment. His words carried new weight now that every alien in the bay understood exactly what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. The mission to Zarion 4 was no longer about proving human worth. It was about showing the galaxy what happened when you gave the most dangerous species in known space a reason to fight. The rebels waiting on the moon below had made the fatal mistake of threatening innocent civilians and challenging galactic authority. They were about to learn why every species in the coalition had agreed that humans deserved a place among the most elite military forces in the galaxy. The demonstration in the transport bay had been just a preview of the destruction that was about to be unleashed on Zarion 4.